Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm privileged to follow my friend from Selkirk, Interlake Eastman, who raised a number of issues related to the Canadian Armed Forces. I want to also thank our colleague from Calgary Nose Hill for her long and consistent efforts working with people like Nadia Murad, who is quoted in this opposition motion, because Canadians are really concerned about a government that has no ability to act. And it's sad when I hear the rhetoric from the Deputy House Leader, but when I hear from a distinguished veteran like the member from Canada Carleton suggesting that the government is somehow powerless and that we're politicizing this, Madam Speaker. Protecting Canadians is probably the most fundamental aspect of what a federal government should do. And what is troubling with the Liberals, Madam Speaker, they act as if they have no ability to act on all issues, whether it's criminal justice and a killer going to a healing lodge, whether it's funding the PTSD treatments of a murderer, whether it's recruiting ISIS foreign fighters to come back to Canada. They make it seem like they're powerless to act, Madam Speaker. It's actually an abdication of leadership. When their department makes a mistake, you rectify it if you're a leader. If there's a risk facing Canadians, you prevent it, Madam Speaker. I see nothing of the kind by the Liberals, and that should concern Canadians less than 1 year away from an election when they can get a government that's serious again. Madam Speaker, I'm going to start with a quote to just talk about ISIS, ISIL, and how dangerous they are as an organization and the people that belong to them. I quote, "ISIL threatens peace and democracy with terror and barbarism. The images are horrific, the stories are appalling, and the victims are many." End quote, Madam Speaker. Who said that? Prime Minister of Canada, the member for Papineau in this House, 3 or 4 months into his government. He recognized the profound barbarism and threat of this terror force. But what did he do? Why did he say those words in this chamber? He was withdrawing Canadian participation in airstrikes meant to hinder the advance of ISIS. He was stepping back at a time when France and a lot of our allies were asking Canada to step up because our pilots are the best at targeting in those circumstances, Madam Speaker. He was pulling back even at the same time he recognized that ISIS was a grave threat to Canada and our allies. That just shows how out of touch the Prime Minister of Canada is when it comes to terrorism, national security, Madam Speaker. What's worse is the Defence Minister at the time made it seem like our allies were fine with that decision, Madam Speaker, that there was no concern that we withdrew our CF-18 fighter jets from degrading and destroying ISIS and put in more training and ground troops, supplementing the ground troops, the CSOR and JTF-2 people that the Conservative government had put in with the fighter jets, Madam Speaker. The Defence Minister made it seem like our allies were fine with that. Trouble is, documents came out later that the Iraqi minister, where our troops were operating, pleaded with him not to withdraw, Madam Speaker. I still don't think the minister has addressed how he misled the House with respect to that. Documents revealed on December 20th, 2015, after he inspected a parade, the Defence Minister of that country pleaded with him consistently not to withdraw our fighter jets. So that's how they started with ISIS, Madam Speaker, and now we see it continue to the point where they're almost proactively recruiting foreign fighters back to Canada, Madam Speaker, even with tenuous links. And there's 2 areas where I think this is wrong at law, Madam Speaker. We should not be repatriating people that have gone, and to use the term of the Prime Minister, committed barbarous acts overseas. We should not be bringing them home, Madam Speaker. And historically, Canadians have not. What previous governments have done, Madam Speaker, is something called constructive repudiation of a dual citizenship or of consular rights, Madam Speaker, meaning you do not act on consular affairs. In fact, the Prime Minister sending people to see Jihadi Jack, a British national involved, it is reported, in terrible crimes, Madam Speaker, even in his own words acknowledging that, Canada proactively offering him consular affairs. The government does not have to do that, Madam Speaker. In fact, our Foreign Affairs Committee right now is confirming, witness after witness, consular affairs are a Crown prerogative. It is the ability of the government to decide who they provide these consular supports to. If my Liberal friends, and I'm glad they're listening, don't take my word for it, let's take the Supreme Court of Canada's words for it, Madam Speaker. In the Cotter decision, what's interesting about Omar Cotter is that government, in previous iterations of Martin and Chrétien, they actually violated his rights by participating in investigations. The Supreme Court of Canada said the Harper government was within its rights not to repatriate Mr. Cotter. Here's the irony, Madam Speaker, quoting it at paragraph 35 from that judgment. The prerogative power over foreign affairs has not been displaced by Section 10 of the Act and continues to be exercised by the federal government. They go on, Madam Speaker. It is for the executive and not the courts to decide whether and how to exercise its powers, end quote, Madam Speaker. It is for the government to decide, Madam Speaker. There is no right of consular access for terrorists, Madam Speaker, certainly nationals from other countries. What has this government decided? What discretion are they exercising? They're recruiting Jihadi Jack and a number of these terrible individuals back to Canada, Madam Speaker.
I blame Kevin.
They do not have to do that at law, Madam Speaker. That's important to note. What did the previous government do? We mentioned Bill S7, Madam Speaker, which actually criminalized the activity to travel to a foreign country for training or work with terrorists. So actually, they could charge every single one of these people, Madam Speaker, because they're detained by the Peshmerga. The Peshmerga have said these Canadians were found with ISIS fighters, Madam Speaker. The Conservative government actually provided a charge for that. We made it easier to seek peace bonds, Madam Speaker. A right law enforcement has had degraded with C-59 under this bill, Madam Speaker. We also brought in the ability for victims of terrorism, like our friend Maureen Baznicki, to sue foreign terror agencies, Madam Speaker. That is what the government did. And in fact, at the time, Professor Christian Leuprecht at Queen's University said, I quote, the Conservative Bill S7, quote, prevents the foreign fighter problem, end quote, Madam Speaker. We actually tried to deal with the difficult decisions of governing. We didn't pass it off and act like they're floating down a river taken by the stream, whether it's funding PTSD treatments for criminals, whether it's transferring child killers to a healing lodge. They act like they're powerless. They should check an org chart, Madam Speaker, and realize they are in charge.
Here, here.
I will also bring up how the Liberal government's current conduct, Madam Speaker, is actually in violation of a United Nations Security Council resolution. Now, what's interesting is there's a half-baked campaign underway by this government to obtain a temporary seat on the Security Council. Perhaps they should read the resolutions of the Security Council they intend to join. Resolution 2178, Madam Speaker, which deals with foreign terrorist fighters, Madam Speaker, defines it. Two key findings I would note from this Security Council resolution. First, quote, the massive flow of refugees and asylum seekers from conflict zones also raises the risk of foreign terrorist fighters, and they will attempt to use the refugee system to escape persecution, end quote, Madam Speaker. They said vigilant vetting must be a requirement for specific countries in the world. This is the United Nations, Madam Speaker. It goes on to say this, and this shows how disconnected this government is. Quote, because the related challenges are by their nature international, the Council has called on member states to enhance their international cooperation in preventing their travel, end quote, Madam Speaker. The Security Council of the United Nations is asking Canada to prevent the travel of foreign fighters, and we have a government facilitating it, Madam Speaker. I'm wondering if the members of the Security Council, when they're voting to see who they should add, will wonder if they should invite the one country swimming in the opposite direction, Madam Speaker, the one country pulling out against the fight against ISIS, Madam Speaker, the one country recruiting them back rather than preventing their travel, Madam Speaker. Governing is about making tough decisions, Madam Speaker. There's more to being the government than just photographs and hashtags.
Here, here.